Step 10. Continue to take personal inventory and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. With that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome our first speaker, DC, to our weekly meeting of 10 and 11 to share their experience, strength and hope for 20 minutes. DC, over to you.
Thank you so much, Janie. My name is DC. I'm an addict. I'm grateful to be here with all of you guys. I'm grateful I'm an addict is what I am. I always say that because, it's funny. I remember when I first was getting sober and clean and sober in 2021, and I did not feel grateful. I did not feel grateful at all. I felt like this disease of addiction was an affliction, was a scarlet letter, was something I had to compartmentalize and be ashamed of. And I'm so grateful that, as the result of the 12 steps of Cocaine Anonymous and as a result of working all 12 steps of Cocaine Anonymous, having had a spiritual awakening, right? My perspective on life these days is different. And today I get to live a life that's filled and enriched with spiritual principles. And here's the thing is that I don't do it perfectly, right? None of us do. None of us do as much as I want to, right? Because I'm one of those people, I'll tell you right out the gate, that one of my character defects is perfectionism. Right. I'm like hypersensitive to what's going on around me. I'm hyper vigilant. Even when I walk into a room in person or on Zoom, I'm looking at people's faces. I'm assessing the vibe and I get a little bit wrapped up in how people perceive me. Am I saying the right thing? Am I showing the right thing? Am I put together enough? Right. I have all these fears and insecurities that drive me and kind of like almost like take a step before I take a step. Right. It's this hyper vigilance that I've crafted. And I used to think that perfectionism was a gift. I used to think that was something that kept me in good shape, that made me, gave me this sense of emotional integrity, if you will. And I'm grateful that was one of many things that I've been wrong about in my journey in recovery and in my 47 years of life. I'm so grateful to be here. I get to hang out with a bunch of clean and sober addicts this afternoon. It's afternoon here in California. It's actually only 11 o'clock in the morning. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And I get to share the Zoom screen with my dear friend Andy, and he's one of my favorite people in this recovery walk that I get to do. When I first got clean and sober, Andy was one of those people that I'd listened to, and his message always resonated with me, always brought something to me that changed my perspective, that was part of my spiritual awakening. So many spiritual experiences that I had based on his wisdom. And then he told me something. He told me that most of the things that we hear in these rooms are recycled. They're borrowed and stolen from other people, right? And so a lot of the things that I was getting from him that were reaching me so deeply where nobody else could before were things, they were wisdom that had come from other alcoholics and addicts before him. And now guess what? I get to be part of that recycling program, and I get to spit a lot of that same stuff out to other people, right? Because that's what we do around here, because it works. It works. We're here today to talk about steps 10 and 11. And, I wanted to share with you guys some of my early experiences around steps 10 and 11. And I'll tell you that in probably my first, 30, 60 days, it was early sobriety for me. And I remember sitting in a meeting, and I don't even know if I'd started my steps yet. And somebody read the 10th step promises. And I remember hearing those 10-step promises talking about being in that position of neutrality, feeling safe and protected, right? And not if it's placed in front of us, like we recoil from it as from a hot flame, right? We're not tempted, nor are we afraid. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's all I want. That's all I want in this life. Like, I want to be able to walk in the grocery store. See, I was one of those people that I'd walk in the grocery store in early sobriety, and I would drop my head as I walked past the liquor aisle. Like, it was like if I made eye contact with one of the shiny, pretty bottles, it was going to draw me in, right? And I was going to be in a lot of trouble. But it also stirred up this really, it just stirred up these feelings of ick. You know what I mean? That restless, irritable, discontent, anxious, afraid, apart from just everything. It just really, invoked my spiritual malady. Like, I wanted to run over to the fire alarm and pull it, running and screaming out of the store, just to create some chaos because I was so uncomfortable. And all I wanted was those 10-step promises. And, I remember at that same grocery store, probably right around that same time, I was going through the checkout, and I had all these items on the conveyor belt, and there was no alcohol. And the checker, who knew me, because I spent a lot of time in this grocery store, right? I spent a lot of time, and he checked me out plenty of times, checked out my groceries. And I remember him saying to me one day in early sobriety, I had no alcohol on the conveyor belt. He goes, "Didn't you forget something?" I was livid. I was like, he lit something up in me. And I tell you what, I read him the riot act. "Why are you always giving me grief? Why don't you mind your own business?" Right? I was so unsettled. I wasn't safe and protected. I wasn't in that position of neutrality, but I wanted to be so badly. And the truth is, well, when I came into the rooms in 2021, my plan wasn't to get clean and sober. My plan wasn't to get a sponsor. My plan wasn't to work any of your steps or to be a part of this fellowship. I didn't want or need any more friends. And what was underlying all of this, because I would have told you that I came in really, really angry, 2 middle fingers up. I don't want to hear anything you have to say. But what was underlying all that anger was this deep, deep-seated fear. This deep-seated fear. I was completely terrified and afraid that I was the one person that was unworthy, undeserving of God's grace and mercy. I remember a woman, and she hadn't become my sponsor yet. I'd picked her, but she hadn't become my sponsor yet. And she asked me one day, she said, "DC, what are your reservations? What are your hesitations? Why won't you just come all the way in and sit all the way down with us?" And I said to her, "Diane, I don't think that this program can work for me." See, I knew that Cocaine Anonymous worked. I knew that Alcoholics Anonymous worked. I'm a 3rd-generation recovered addict. My mom has 39 years in this program. My grandmother died 1 month shy of this program. She got sober 6 months before I was born. So there's not a day in my life that Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous hasn't been a part of my existence. And yet I somehow believed that I was the one person that couldn't recover in this program. And that woman that asked me that question, her name was Diane, and she became my first sponsor in this program of recovery. And we got started on a journey through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the program that I worked them in initially. But you know what? I qualify for a lot of programs like many of us do, right? And we started going through that book, and the way that we went through the steps was line by line and page by page. And we started with the blank page of the big book. And you know, there was a lot of struggle early on, you know, because I really believed that I was going to outrun, outsmart, outthink this thing if only I tried harder. I just had to, like, self-knowledge would fix me, right? All these lies that we tell ourselves. And through the process of working the steps, like I come to believe that I am an addict. Then once I put any substance in my body, liquid, pill, powder, plant form, I lose all power, choice, and control. I'm at the mercy of a disease that tells me when we're done. And so I get that understanding, and I go through and I develop this relationship with a God of my understanding, and I make a decision to turn my will and my life over to him. And we do the inventory, and we get through the steps. And as we're going through, we get through the amends, and we get to step 10. And here were my instructions for step 10. We read the pages, I think it's 83, 84, and 85, whatever it is in the big book. We read it on step 10. And what she said to me was, "I'm going to send you a worksheet, and I want you to complete this nightly inventory every night for 10 days. And then after that, we move on to step 11. And that was my experience with step 10, my first round in sobriety. And you know what? I love that in the spiritual experience, it talks about how honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, these are the qualities that are indispensable. And I'm so grateful that I embraced that, because you know what? As I continue to grow and evolve in my journey of recovery, my comprehension, my understanding, my application of the steps continues to grow and evolve with me. And so that was my experience in step 10. So it's probably, I don't know, I was maybe 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I don't know what it was. Like, I'd read step 10 with my sponsees, and I'd started to have, by the way, they're not my sponsees. That's just something that we say in the rooms, right? They don't belong to me. That's a very big call out that I've been inspired to say lately. They're not mine. They're other addicts that trust me to walk this path. But so I've been reading, you know, step 10 and taking other addicts through the steps. And as we go through step 10, I'm so easily able to see and how to encourage them, how to redirect them to lean into the disciplines of step 10. And I love step 10 because it lays out everything so clearly, so concisely. It gives us step-by-step instructions with timelines, right? Very, very clear. And the part about step 10 is this. It says, continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately. We make amends if we have harmed anyone quickly. And we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. And I love that. I love those guidelines, those suggestions, the parameters that they give us around step 10, because they keep me in the moment. They keep me aware. But I've had this realization lately that step 10 requires something from me. It requires a level of honesty with myself about what's really going on. Am I willing to clearly see my actions? Am I willing to clearly take a look at what my motives really are behind the ways that I'm coming through? What my motives really are? Am I hiding a bad motive under a good one? Right? Because left to my own, and we learn about this in step 6 and 7, right? The 7-step prayer says, my creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. Because here's the thing, on my own, without God's guidance and direction, I don't know what's good and I don't know what's bad. I'll take the good stuff and I'll minimize it and downplay it. And I'll take the bad stuff and I'll justify it. You would respond like that too. You would have reacted the exact same way. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden I'm downplaying and minimizing. So when I'm in step 10, all throughout the day, I'm giving this opportunity to really lie into some honesty, to rigorous honesty with myself and with others about how I'm moving through the world. And sometimes that perfectionism gets hung up. And that's why I talked about at the beginning of this talk, because sometimes my perfectionism doesn't want me to see the ways I've gone sideways, the ways I've treated people unfairly, unjustly, or been reactive in a moment. And so it was about a year and a half ago. I'm getting back to the story, I promise. It was about a year and a half ago, right? I'm spinning out on something, you guys, like we do sometimes. I'm crashing out. I'm in this little spiral about something. It's probably over a dude, if I'm being really honest. Those tend to be one of my biggest sources of conflict in my life. And I called another addict and I'm spiraling out to her and she goes, how's your step 10? And I go, well, it's good. It's good. And she goes, grab your book. And I go, okay. And so I grab my book and we start reading that part. And she's like, okay, read it out loud, Mom. I continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment. I go, and fear? When did they add fear to the 10th step, right? Like I've been reading this, you guys, for 2.5 years. Like I knew it was there, but for some reason it was like I was seeing the word fear there for the first time ever. And I realized that in that moment, in that crash out, in that crisis, that self-imposed crisis that I was having, I was in a position of fear. And she goes, have you asked God to remove this? And I go, well, yeah. And she goes, no. Have you really asked God to remove this? Because like I told you guys, part of that, when I came in, I thought it was undeserving and unworthy of God's grace and mercy, right? And sometimes I forget that and I still fall into that part of, it's really self-pity is what it does, if I'm being honest with you. And so I'll go to God and I'll be real, I call it humble, right? With my prayers, with my ask, like, God, I could use a little help with this. And what she did is she said, DC, God can handle it. If you need to get loud, if you need to lay on the floor and cry, if you really, really need to invite God to be a part of the solution with some conviction, you need to do it. And for some reason, in that moment, she gave me permission to go to God with a true level of humility, with a true level of powerlessness, and to really, really ask for his guidance, right? To really ask for his care and protection, to really invite him to bring me to that position of neutrality, to really, really let him give me the experience of being safe and protected. And that was this really, really beautiful experience. And so I'll tell you what, I don't hold back. When I'm in a place of fear, when I'm in a place of resentment, when I'm in a place of dishonesty, when I'm in any one of those places, I catch them so much quicker because these things become a discipline. They become part of the way that I think, part of the way that I move. And again, I don't do it perfectly. So that's probably the biggest thing that I catch myself in, right? Because I'm a fear-based addict and alcoholic, right? I'm always worried about what you think, losing something I have, not getting something I want. What about the outcome? What about this, right? And I float into these places of agnosticism where I'm not trusting and relying upon God. And those are the moments that I find myself grasping for my defects to try and protect me, to try and keep me safe. And what step 10? Is it gives me the opportunity to catch those things, to become aware of those things in the moment, and then to invite God to be a part of the solution. Probably about a year in recovery, I've got a job where I get to work from home a lot. And I was doing a lot of meetings online throughout my workday, right? Throughout my workday. I'm supposed to be on the clock. I'm supposed to be doing something, but what I do instead is I like pause on my email notifications for an hour, sometimes 2 or 3, depending on who's speaking that day, because I've got to be at all the meetings, right? I've got FOMO. I don't want to miss a thing. I'm just convinced that if I miss a thing that somebody says, that Babe says, that like somehow I'm not going to stay sober one more day. And guess what I realized? Because if you would have asked me at that point in my recovery, do you struggle with honesty? I would have said no. Now that I'm clean and sober, I'm pretty honest. I tell the truth. Sometimes I still drift into that place of like lies by omission, where I only tell the parts of the truth that like keep me safe and don't upset you, right? But I'd say aside from that, I'm pretty honest. And then all of a sudden I had this realization with myself. When I'm on the clock for work and I'm sitting in meetings of Cocaine Anonymous for 2 or 3 hours at a time, I'm snoozing my notifications. And at the end of that day, when I put my hours into the time card, I put 8 hours. Is that honest? It's not. It's dishonest. It's stealing from the company, right? And I didn't realize that at the time. It took me a moment. I thought, here I am, justifying my defects again. I'm doing what I need to do to stay clean and sober. I'm staying connected. I'm showing up to support my fellows. They tell me that recovery has to come first, right? All these things, I'm justifying what I'm doing. But like I said, that level of honesty that's required to truly sit comfortably in step 10. I was being dishonest. I was stealing from company time. Now, here's the other part of it. I've corrected that. I try and create a little more balance. Here's the truth. These days, if I sit in this meeting with you guys for an hour, guess what? I'm going to make up that hour. Either like this morning, I logged in and I did an extra hour in the morning because I don't want to live like that anymore. But here's an example of 10-step in real life. I've got a 14-year-old daughter. Should be 15 in December. And she's very teeny. She's very teenagery, right? When she gets out of school at the end of the day, one of the worst things that she dislikes the most, I should say, she hates to have to sit on the corner at the side of the road and wait for me to show up. She wants me to be there by the time she gets to that road, right? So it's one of those days where I've been at work and I know I've got to pick her up and I'm running late and I get halfway to her school and she calls me, and this drives me crazy. She goes, "Hi, Mama, where are you at?" And I'm like, I am on my way. I'm stressed out. I'm running late. I've had a busy day at work. And I snap at her. And I don't even remember what I said, but it wasn't kind. It was kind of shaming. I believe I hung up on her. But one of the things that she said in that conversation, I said, "Why are you calling me and bothering me?" I said, "It's not even 3:20 yet. You get out at 3:20. I'll be there by the time you get out." And she goes, "Mama, I get out at 3:05. And I said, "Why didn't you tell me this?" And she goes, "I don't know. I just figured you're always here when I need you to be. So there was no need." And I got so angry for not knowing what I should have known, right? That I snapped on her, hung up on her, and made her feel terribly. When she was just wondering where I was at. Was I going to be on time? And I have to remember all the times that I neglected her, left her unattended, caused a lot of insecurity, fear, and worry in her life before I got clean and sober. Her reaction to my actions, even today, is a product of the way that I've showed up for her in the past. So guess what happened? Within 30 seconds, I get that little stir in my gut, that little like elbow check in the ribs from God. He's like, "You feel good about that?" And I'm like, "Oh." So what do? Grab my phone, I call her, and I said, "Baby, I'm so sorry." I said, "I'm running late. I'm a little stressed out. I had no right to take it out on you." Right? And that was a 10-step in action in real time. And one of my most challenging positions outside of the rooms. A much greater demonstration lies in our homes, occupations, and affairs. This isn't just about making amends to people in AA that I may have gotten short and snappy with. This isn't just about making amends to a sponsee that I may have sent a voicemail because I was busy watching Netflix and didn't want to be interrupted when we had time set aside to do step work, right? How is this stuff showing up in my real life? Am I able to practice a 10-step at home with my child, with my mom, at work, even in the grocery store, right? When I'm out rocking and rolling and I'm out living real life and somebody goes sideways on me and I respond reactively. I lean into the disciplines of step 10. I invite God to be a part of the solution. And if I follow the instructions, that is one of the most powerful words in the big book because it gives me a condition on either side. If I'm willing to follow those instructions, then I can rest comfortably in God's peace, in God's presence, in God's love. And I get to hopefully echo that and give that away to you. The clock is winding down, so I'm going to shut it down and I'm going to step away and make room for my dear friend Andy. Thank you guys so much for spending some time with me today.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. DC, amazing share, as you can see. So, with that, step 11, sort through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome our second speaker tonight, Andy H., who will share their experience, strength and hope for 20 minutes on step 11. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Janie. Thank you, Katie. Can we just sit in the space for 20 minutes after what DC had to say? No. You know, I'll say a few things. Hi, everybody. My name is Andy. Blessed to be an alcoholic, blessed to be a cocaine addict, blessed to be in this gathering. Thank you, Janie and Katie, for setting this meeting up, for the invitation. It's an honor and a privilege, ultimately a responsibility to give back, right, to these programs that have saved my life. I can never give back to ANCA, but I can try one day at a time. And to have DC with me today, you know, we've been following each other like the old proverbial expression, like we owe each other money. But the currency is not that. The currency is love and service. And we're both restless God seekers. And we found each other. You know, I was looking in my phone book, and I'm sure you all have the same kind of chuckle when you look and see and how you met people, right? And maybe you put enough information to figure it out. So in my phone book, which is probably about DC, we met maybe 3 years ago. I have her as DC, San Diego, South Africa. Now, probably I met her at a meeting on South Africa, but I know she's from San Diego. And DC, thank you. I love you. It's so wonderful to be in this space with you. And for me, it's truly by God's grace, by the relationship I have with God that provides the grace, by our 12 steps that have changed me, that change all of us, by the fellowship of the Spirit and the Spirit of the fellowship, by all of you, my family that's been with me right from the beginning, the men and women I've been blessed to sponsor, the wonderful sponsors that I've had, that I get to live a life well beyond anything that I ever could have imagined. You know, I come from a place today where what doesn't God do? As time has passed and I've seen the miracles in you, the miracles that I've experienced in my life, there isn't anything, right? And it's not my job to interfere with God's plan, whether I want to or not. And in this step, you know, to continue in that relationship, because see, the most important relationship in my life today is my relationship with God. In fact, progression in sobriety for me is progression in my relationship with God, because all relationships flow from that. But when I got to you, about 20 years, it's actually 20 years ago, you know, in July, you know, I was defective in all relationships. And once I sobered up a bit, and my sponsor, Jerry, as I've said before, Jerry was a sponsor that would rather step on my toes than step on my grave. And he pointed me to the fact that relationships are your problem, man. Oh, well, I've got a wife and kids and I work and I've got a team and all this. No, man, you haven't learned yet. And it was intensified even further when he showed me places in our book. In fact, in the 12 by 12, it says, I have a virtual inability, incapable of forming a true partnership with another human being. How about God? How about God? Can I form a partnership? In fact, it's not a partnership, really. You know, the position that I'm in gets said in the third step, right? Where I'm one of God's children, but we'll get to that. And then, of course, the thing that, you know, almost drove me out of the rooms was when Howard Works got read over and over and over again, and it said things like, you know, constitutionally incapable of being honest. How could I ever be honest? You know, how could I ever tell the truth because I told lies for so long? And yet, apparently. And through God's grace and all of you, I've been able to learn how to be honest. Right? So, this step is really based on the fact that, through the handrails, which the steps are to God, right? And it was said, you couldn't say it any better than a William Blake quote, right? Because I needed guidance on where those handrails were, right? And that's what the steps are, the formula for sobriety, the formula for God, and the formula for the good life. You showed me, right? William Blake said, I sought my soul, but my soul I could not see. I sought my God, but my God eluded me. And I sought my brother, and I found all three. Without that, I would have been absolutely doomed. So with much gratitude and love, it's the people that have come before me that I've watched and continue to watch to see what they do, to see how they've expanded their consciousness, right? Because I spent a lifetime, as many of us have said, Carl Jung even said it. He said, we tried the lowest form of poison to reach the highest form of humanity. And little did I know that was an artificial way to a spiritual experience, but the 12 steps are the bona fide way to a spiritual awakening, and it's tailor-made for folks like me, for folks like us. This journey's been generous, and what I saw the first time around going through the steps is that it truly is a slingshot. It is, as Bill Wilson said, 1 through 9 is really meant to be the launch pad into the spiritual realm. And as Jerry told me very clearly, he said that my job is to help you meet the conditions to enter the world of the spirit. And when you enter the world of the spirit in 10, 11, and 12, God can heal this broken world through you. What? I just want the pain to stop. He says, oh, the pain. And the pain is, well, God doesn't waste pain. So that expression of that pain, sitting in the pain, it's just pain, will take you to another place because your whole life you've avoided pain. Yeah. So I do come from a place today where what doesn't God do? And in the end, how much time am I spending with God, right? Because this 11th step talks about it. It's one thing to read page 87 and say things like, upon awakening, right? As my eyes open, I begin my prayer life. I begin the 3rd and 7th step prayers, right? I begin the Thomas Merton prayer. I begin to ask what God would have me do today. And I know that I'm going to have a really good day if my first thought is not about me, right? But how much time am I spending with God after being around for a while? Well, there's a couple of barometers. One of them is, if I spend as much time with my kids as I spend with God, would my kids feel loved? Ooh, that's a tough one. Right? And we have a lot of music out there that talks about that too. This gentleman wrote this song a little while ago. If I only talk to God when I need a favor and I only pray when I ain't got her, so who the heck am I? Who the heck am I to expect a savior if I only talk to God when I need a favor? But God, I need a favor. The only God I had in my life was the God of, God give me. And you showed me the other positions, right? First it was God help me. And next it was God use me. So I come from a place today where I ask God to use me, right? And you showed me that God can best use a man or a woman when he comes to the end of self. And that required some smashing. That required some incineration of a giant-sized ego, that was either too high or too low. And I believe that the first 9 steps are exactly that. They're to get my ego, our egos, right-sized, so then we take a dive into the world of the spirit, and continue to help others. For me, God never does anything to us or for us, but always through us by changing our consciousness. And I've often contemplated what the kingdom of heaven means. And what you showed me was the kingdom of heaven is the dimension of spaciousness within me. That's what's come from being around a while, from learning from all of you. And it began with willingness, in step 2, right? This journey for me, the progression in sobriety in my relationship and God consciousness started with willingness, right? Then it moved to belief, faith, trust, reliance, and now abandonment. And I've got instructions in step 2. I've got instructions in step 11, but I've also got very clear instructions on what position I need to be in. On page 62, we decided that God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father. We are his children. That's the position. And when we take that position, we receive the as we's. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, and the hereafter. We were reborn. When I got to you 20 years ago in July, my sobriety date's October 21st, 2005. So I was bouncing around in the summer, in and out of a rehab. Got thrown out of that rehab because I couldn't give you a clean urine. Had my head down, cried ice cold tears. But as I've said before, the way God brought me to you began in there, so it seems. Folks like you were bringing in meetings into that facility. I don't remember anything that was said, but I know now today that those were God moments in which I clung to a kernel of hope. Because what were you doing? See, my recovery didn't start with step 0 or step 1. Step 0 on page 30, the negotiation page. It started in the 12th step in your hearts, bringing that in, right? And eventually, God separated me from alcohol on October 21st, 2005. That was a separation, though I didn't know it at the time. That was a divorce date when the whisper of desperation grew to a scream and was greater than my obsession to drink and use cocaine. There's the miracle right there. And that obsession, as people say, as women say, greater than a mother's love for her children. For me, it was greater than my love for my kids and my wife, right? I had abandoned them for a bit. So from that moment to this moment, what's happened? And I want to get to 2 points in our book. One of them is, as the result of continued practice of step 11, continuing expanding, and we're told very clearly, see where religious people are right, make use of what they have to offer. So in between, right, the upon awakening to when I retire at night, the nightly review, it's a chock full of hours in between there. If I go just by, when I wake up in the morning to when I go to bed, it can mean in between the use of anything that could raise my consciousness of what he or she would have me do. And I mean anything. Who knows? Upon awakening in the morning may not mean the morning. It may be, I may be asleep, dreaming I'm awake half the day. And then finally at 12 noon that I'm finally awakened. Like, oh, okay. Because if you're like me, you lived your life asleep, dreaming you were awake for so long. And now waking up means something very different. It means being present, conscious, able to face life successfully. Right? All of that. So there's a line in our book that says, God will help you create the fellowship that you crave. And I just got back from hanging out with a number of you folks that are on this call, spent some of the best days of my life over in the UK. In the beginning, the we for me was on the small side, right? We talk about the we, right? We admit, right? We get sober together, right? The we was small. It included a sponsor and a couple of guys, in my home group, the morning after group, Bagels, Love, and Fellowship every Saturday, 10:30 a.m., 3:30 your time. Some of you have been there, so come see us. The we was small, but now the threads of recovery, The way we've knitted ourselves together in an endless quilt of love and service has expanded. See, that was something that I always wanted, was to feel at home with people, to be able to live in my own skin, right? To have the world expand by being shoulder to shoulder with people that understood me and I understood them. The biggest problem was that I couldn't stand myself. And little did I know that Oscar Wilde, see, I had an allergy to myself eventually. And Oscar Wilde said, learning to love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. That what was said to me when I came into that home group. And now, because there is self-love, I have intense, passionate and devotion and kindness and just conviviality, the idea, we can sit all together and be at home with ourselves. That kind of love comes from the sense of oneness. We all get each other. We know each other the second we open our mouths. So the experience that I had by being over in the UK, I'll take with me the rest of my life. Little did I know the fellowship would expand to places in the prisons, and the rehabs in New Jersey and New York, going behind the walls to bring meetings in, right? See, I don't have the power to change God's mind. And little did I know that I would be somehow kept on my job for many, many years, sober. Well, they had me, I was in this company for 30 years. They had me drunk and high for a good 15, but then they had me sober for about 14 before I retired. And they kept me, forever, even though other people had been gone for one reason or another. And I'm wondering why. And little did I know that my job, as God had me to do, was to go into a maximum security prison and bring a typical AA meeting in there, to expand the fellowship in there, sitting around with guys that had been incarcerated for a long time. And we read the big book. I was able to sponsor folks in there and see that some of these guys actually stayed sober and came out and are living crime-free, sober lives. Little did I know that was part of the deal. The fellowship, the expanding fellowship that I craved, right? There's an old TV show in the States that some of you may know called Cheers, right? And in Cheers, you walked into the bar, the opening credits, and everybody sat down and seemed like they just knew each other. They loved each other. They felt great. I always wanted a drink like in that bar Cheers. And I might have had a few moments, when alcohol pieced me together and kept me alive for so long, right? And cocaine then added on top of that. See, it was ABC, alcohol before cocaine, but then it didn't matter anymore. And I had all those years, but I never got back to that place, right? Where I felt that I could be at one with you and at one with me. Forget about God at this point. Always wanted to drink that way and use that way. And then little did I know, God has a sense of humor. There's an AA clubhouse right here in New Jersey called the Cheers Clubhouse. And then there's an alleyway and a liquor store, right? See, all those things, all those places in which the expanding fellowship. For whatever reason, I was directed to Chicago in 2013. And in 2013, I'm bouncing around in meetings there, and everybody's talking about Thomas Merton. And little did I know that I'd be a Thomas Merton chaser now, years and years later, in search of Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton, who he wrote so much, said so much. He said that God's first language is silence. But he also gave us this prayer of unknowing. God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me, and I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I'm doing. I hope I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore, I'll trust you always, though I may seem to be lost in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me. and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen. So in search of Thomas Merton, it took me to Kentucky a few years back with a few fellows from the area to the Abbey of Gethsemani, where Thomas Merton studied and lived. I was blessed to hang out with the monks and pray in the most quiet space that I've ever seen, and feel more oneness, more being at home. I see there's 30 seconds left. I wanted to get into what DC mentioned, being crushed by a self-imposed crisis, because in my journey now today, in the most current situation, is how relationships have evolved. And in a nutshell, what's happened for me is I've seen that sobriety is not a negotiation. The God consciousness that I needed some years back is different than it is today. It's never static. It's supposed to be growing. See, the only way you can coast in this program is downhill. And needs today for God are as great as they've ever been. And it's given me these realizations that I don't have time to talk about, but they have to do with relationships, very special relationships, right? The idea that I need to protect myself, right? Because above all else, and it was said to me in the beginning, anything you put in front of sobriety, right, you're going to lose. And to me, to be healthy, to be alive, to be present, to know my purpose, which is to stay sober and help somebody else, to care for myself in the service of others, that is the job God has me doing today. And I'm going to end with this. I promise. Right, Katie? Right, Janie? I'm going to end with this for somebody that was lost for so long, that came to you not as a hot mess, but as an icicle, who thawed out and felt vicious pain and didn't shy away from it because you were going through things yourselves, and I needed to follow you. And I'm not unique. We have the you wills on page 152. You will make lifelong friends. You will be bound to them in new and wonderful ties. You will escape disaster, and you will commence shoulder and shoulder your common journey. Then you will know what it means to give of yourself, that others may survive and rediscover life. You will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself. Thank you, Janie and Katie and everybody here today. I love you all. Thank you, DC. That's enough out of me.
Wow. God bless you, Andy. Thank you so, so much. Thank you. So, I will now let DC back into the room with you, Andy, for 10 minutes for a spiritual discussion, or however you two guys see fit. Thank you.
Thank you again, Janie. I'm so excited, Andy. I'm so excited, because you brought something in that was a huge pivotal point. It was a huge change in my step 11 practice, right? In the big book, it tells us to be quick to see where religious people are right. And I think that in my early days of sobriety, I had a little bit of resistance to that, right? If the prayers had too many thys and thous and lords and all this other stuff, I was like, ugh, And I remember sitting in a meeting, and for the very first time, I heard you drop the Merton prayer like you just did. And it resonated so, so deeply inside me, right? Because it reminds me of my humility and of this beautiful gift that we have to grow and evolve a relationship and dependence upon God. And so that was a big part, like a big shift in my step 11 practice, one of the things that I've added. So tell me, because I'm going to steal this next, right? Tell me what you're doing today to continue to grow and expand your relationship with God, and how you continue to grow and expand your prayer and meditation life.
Thanks, DC. Yeah. For me, I didn't get to talk about it, but the light that God is shining on relationships, has been very clear. And I've not wanted to see it for a long time. It has to do, to be blunt, with things that have been toxic to my recovery for years, in some people, in some loved ones. And as I've been taught, and it's definitely my experience, that God just gives us a little more than we can handle, not too much more. But here it is, today, where I'm seeing things much clearer. The vision that I'm getting with these relationships, right? So it gets back to what you started to say in 53, crushed by a self-imposed crisis we cannot postpone and evade. Either God is everything or else he's nothing. So God is everything, which means that what I'm seeing today, I'm seeing with very clear eyes. And the question is what to do next. And that's what I'm waiting for. So the idea that it's just, it's trust and reliance. No, it's abandonment now. Because God is everything, right? And what's helped me lately, is to get even deeper into Emmett Fox, right? So Emmett Fox, we all, have probably studied at one level or another, and I missed this pamphlet until now. And this has helped me too. So I don't know what the next steps are, but I see the truth much clearer today. Things that I just did not want to see about some of the most, I think, important relationships in my life. There's some fear there, but then I'm immediately, contacted by God to say, I got this, so yeah, so that's one aspect, but I want to ask you something, on perfectionism, hypervigilism, hypervigilism. How are you dealing with that? You brought that up for quite a while. How are you having that lesson? As you put it, it's one of your defects, right?
Yeah, it is. And here's the thing, the longer, maybe that's not the word that I'm looking for, but like as I remain immersed in recovery, right? As I continue to get to work with other addicts and alcoholics, as I spend time in meetings, as I continue to go through the work with other addicts and alcoholics and for myself, and as I talk to like all these things that go into this big, beautiful life of recovery, right? Has given me this opportunity. Here's what I'll say. I feel like through the work that we do in these rooms, we have an opportunity to become a more authentic version of ourselves. Because a lot of that, especially the perfectionism, like that's a fear-based behavior, right? And so as I continue to be immersed in this experience, like some of that fear falls away, where I catch it and I invite God to give me a better way. And just recently, I was reminded of this when I was first getting sober. I would sit in this meeting, and this woman would always introduce herself, and she'd say, my name is Veronica. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm grateful for a God that sees me as he sees me and not how I see myself. And I hadn't thought of that for so long, but just recently I was struggling with like the way I was seeing myself and beating myself up and feeling like I was falling short of my standards, not God's standards, right? My standards. And I heard those words from Veronica. And so what I started doing in the mornings, I started building that in to my morning prayer and meditation. I have a willingness portion of my prayer where I'm asking for the willingness to trust and rely upon God, the willingness to do the work I need to do to continue to grow, the willingness to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And then I added in, I asked for the willingness to see me as God sees me and not how I see myself. And that ties into what you just said, Andy, like this process of, and I jotted it down. Hopefully I got it quick. You talked about moving from willingness to faith, to trust, to belief, to abandonment. That's where I'm striving for, is that abandonment, right? I think I'm still in the trust and belief section of the process, but you know what? Like that's what I strive for. So if I can abandon myself and keep inviting God to see me as he sees me and not how I see myself, I get less wrapped up in that concept of perfectionism.
Yeah. Thanks. No, that's definitely the path, it really is. And it reminded me of something that Jimmy A said, a lot of us probably know Jimmy A from Jersey. He said, am I seeing my life through the lens of my character defects, or I'm seeing my life through the lens of God. And that's what you were hitting on, right? Seeing it through the limited vision that we all have because we only know a little and we know less as time marches on, which is a good thing, which is a good thing. So let's see. What I got from what you had to say was, in relationships with, because we're always talking about relationships, right? I mean, the steps move us from resentment to forgiveness. And what seemed a little subtle is now right, fresh, open about relationships. How are you now able to balance things, with work, with your daughter, with all the responsibilities? Are you in a good place with all of that?
Here's the thing. Like, God always works it out. That's the absolute truth. Like, God always works it out for me. Just recently, I remember getting to this point, and I was thinking to myself, like, I can't work with any more addicts and alcoholics right now. Like, I'm too in the work with, like, other addicts and alcoholics. I'm a single mom. I work full time. My daughter talked me into fostering a puppy. Don't ever do it. If they try and tell you to, say no immediately. It was the one thing that was too much. But as soon as I said that to myself, I was at a meeting and a woman came up to me and she asked me to sponsor her. And I was like, yeah. Right. I just got done telling myself, like, I can't take on anymore, because there was this still small voice in my head that said, I'm going to work it out. And, like, that's what happens. You know what I mean? If I remain honest, open-minded, and willing, like, God works out the details. And here's the beautiful thing. I get to remind this when sponsees or other addicts in my life call me with my problems disguised as theirs, right? I have this beautiful opportunity to remind them, like, when you look back, God has always provided everything you needed. Maybe not what you wanted, but what you needed. And so if I can stay in that place of trust and reliance with a little bit of effort on my part, right? Like, I can't just sit back and be like, God's got it. I don't need to do anything. I have to stay in that awareness. I have to put some effort into balancing it, make sure that I'm spending time with my kid. I'm attending to things, and I need to be willing to let go of what I think I need and let God come in and show me where I need to be. It's that abandonment that you're talking about. That's what I'm running with next, Andy, is this quest for abandonment. Thank you.
The quest for abandonment. Yes, yes. Well, as was taught to me, I mean, you look at the third and the seventh step prayer, and the seventh step prayer is really a third step prayer with teeth, right? I mean, it talks about abandonment in a sense, whereas the third step is, is that decision. And it's that transition where, you're not so much as letting go, but you're asking God to take everything. Just take it, right? And be a restless God seeker and never let anything get in the way of that. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. I love you.
I love you too.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andy and DC. That was amazing. We can have some appreciation for these guys. So the room is now going to be opened for questions and answers. Please be mindful to keep your speaking back to just questions. A digital timer will be put up for the questions of 2 minutes. This is to give everyone as much opportunity to ask a question. If you have drunk or used today, please try to refrain from sharing. However, if you do have a question or need to talk, stay after the meeting and someone will be more than happy to listen and to support you. The room is now open for Q&A. Oh, sorry, it's me. Sunny is first in with a question.
Hi, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a. It was kind of touched on just a moment ago, and I was going to ask DC about obviously, having a kind of like busy lifestyle is very similar to mine, juggling family, juggling recovery, doing all these kind of things. I mean, how do you practically kind of like fit your step tens daily inventory into your life, and what's one key benefit you found from it? To Andy, for step 11. How is your prayer and meditation involved in seeking God's will, especially compared to just pushing your own? And for both of you, how do these daily practices of steps 10 and 11 specifically help you avoid that kind of dry drunk and bring you that peace?
Thanks, Sunny. The benefit to step 10 is that I sleep a lot better at night. I'll tell you that, right? Like I'm one of those people that when I'm not spiritually fit, when I'm going through the world and I'm not catching stuff as I'm going along, the next morning I'm in the shower, right? And I'm having a conversation with somebody that's not there. What I should have said was what were they thinking, right? And I'm in that place and I know that that's when I'm undisciplined and I'm not in that place of being willing to be honest with myself about my motives, my actions, and how I'm going. But as I continue to lean in, I think I mentioned this, as I continue to lean into the practice, I catch it quicker. I still fall short, like I did with my daughter. I popped off at her. It's about something that wasn't her fault. And then I quickly get that nudge from God, right? That's like, hey, maybe you need to correct that. So I'll let Andy answer, come in on the 11-step part.
Thank you, DC. Hey, Sonny, good to see you. Yeah, I was going to say something about step 10 because it seemed, right to get to that step because of how that has saved my ass time and time again. I was introduced to things like a preventive 10-step where if I'm going into a situation, right, because it's all about awareness, right? And we know that, generally, if we're going into situations, can we get the God armor or guard suit a little stronger? And that means, looking at where my character defects might emerge. Could be a business meeting, right? So to pray ahead of that so that those defects, are minimized or don't show up at all based on how God wants it to run. For me, the 10 steps, in general is a moving meditation throughout the day, right? In which, it's not that you push my buttons, is that I have buttons to be pushed, and the 10-step deactivates that. So for me, my practice changes. It could mean taking the word watch, and keeping it, on my dashboard in the car to continue to watch, right? Watch. What am I watching for? All that fun stuff. Character defects, the best attempt at getting what I want, right? Because the world owes me everything, right? That's the old self. That's the third dimension self. So, it could be watch. It could be ask, right? It could be asking God to remove them at once. Doesn't mean they're going to go at once, but I ask at once. So it's that rhythm that, the 10-step mechanics, which continue to work. They're not perfect though, right? Sometimes I forget, but I have it as a working part of my existence right now. And in the end, that bleeds into the 11th step, right? Because the 10th step really, takes me to God, right? Takes me to the practices. So they're really interwoven. It's just that the 10th step, there's no delay in the 10th step for me. I can't wait, it needs to happen, almost immediately if I'm stuck, or if I'm not stuck by doing a preventive one. So I hope that answers things. Sonny, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. You were heard. Bill Swan, you're next.
Hey, when you say my last name, because if I say something stupid, everyone knows who did it. Well, thank you guys. These 2 steps are in the top 12 for me. I love them. And so I have a question for each of you. DC, you talked about this regurgitation or recirculation of information. My question is, and I believe that we are all authentic, we are all originals. Is there ever a time that you've disagreed with the common consensus based on the inspiration or intuition and come up with the DC original? That's your question. And then Andy, I was at a new meeting today, And the guy said, there's no atheist in Foxhole Prayers. And then you reconfirmed it with that little poem you read about how can I expect if I only come when I'm in trouble or need favors. And what dawned on me, perhaps, and maybe you can answer this, do you believe maybe, just maybe, that's not the way we were designed? That there's no such thing as an atheist? It's a thought I tell myself. But when I get in enough trouble, something inside of me automatically calls on God, which leads into the second question. The first question, part B, you said, how much time do I spend with God? My question is, when have you ever not spent time with God? Because if he's everything, come on. But how much attention do I give to that? I'll tell you what, if I was God, I would do it 100% of the time because you pay all the attention in the world to me, brother. I love you, my friend. You both did a tremendous job.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to answer the second question first. Have I ever come up with a DC original? I don't think so. I really don't think so. I may have put my own spin on things or whatever, but I really don't believe that I've come up with anything that's original. But here's the thing, like there are times in the rooms, in the fellowship with people that I fellowship with that there are things that I don't agree with, right? There are things that don't necessarily align with my program, right? Or not the way that I think about things. They're not how I would do things. And the beautiful thing that I've discovered and become able to embrace is to let those things go, right? There's no point in being divisive. There's no point in creating separation. There's no point in letting somebody know that I disagree with them, because these days, the way that I move through life is like the silence and the lack of resistance is actually the easier, softer way. So, Andy, over to you, my friend.
Thanks, DC. Thanks, Bill. Well, yeah, the second question about conscious contact, right? When has God never been there? God's always been there, but, I was looking in the wrong places and I was blocked, right? And we know that the 12 steps are there to uncover, discover, and discard the things blocking that's already been there within you and within me. Great reality. So God's always been there, and through everything, right from Jump Street, no doubt about it. But I've been blind to it until I wasn't. No such thing as an atheist. Yeah, that's a hot cauldron of debate, right? My idea would be that, if you believe there's no God, then you do have a belief system, right? And if you believe that, then it's possible for you to eventually believe that there is. It's not that you have no belief, you have maybe unbelief. And it's interesting because I was led to recently, there's an offshoot that some of you, maybe everybody knows about, the secular part of Alcoholics Anonymous, which has been around for quite a while. And there are folks there that apparently, can get well without a firm belief in God. They're able to somehow get sober and stay connected to some belief in something. Some of them are atheists, and I have no opinion on them. I know it just doesn't work for me, but there is room for everybody. That's the point, that our 12 steps can connect us to that which can save us and make us usefully whole. What a blessing. What a gift. The ultimate gift. So, thanks.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Bill, for your question. You were heard. Julian G, could you unmute yourself?
Yeah, good evening, guys. Thank you for everyone doing service. Thank you for this meeting. My name's Julian. I'm very grateful. Recovering addict. My question, I'm going to keep this quick. There's a lot of people on here. My question to you both is, how do you fully concede or surrender your will and your life over to the care of God? And how do I smash my ego and let God take over? Because that's my biggest problem, and I need some help with that. Thanks, guys.
Take this one first, Andy.
Yeah. Back to my sponsor, Jerry, when I was telling him, how do I know that I'm surrendered? How do I know that I'm surrendered? And he would give me the answer, when you no longer have to ask the question. Boy, it was rough. And a concession, in the case of what's written on page 30, is a surrender with a fight. And you just know from the pain that, for me, the pain that I had to go through to know that I was possibly one of you, which was the most vicious time that I've had since I've been here, was when I went from not drinking to going out of my mind because the step one hadn't been infiltrated in me. The wall of denial, delusion, refusal was still great, and I was still negotiating. And we have a page for that, page 30. So if you want to talk offline, sit on page 30, ask God to come in. That's a page where, for me, the truth got revealed, and I died the alcoholic death on that page, right? Because the alcoholic death, as said in our St. Francis prayer, the 11th step prayer, talks about is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. We're not talking about the physical death. We're talking about the death of self. My mind made false sense of who I was, and that needed to go or I wasn't going to make it. So, DC, over to you.
I think for me that moment of surrender happened with step two. To be honest with you, I knew that I was an alcoholic. I knew that I was powerless. I knew that my life was unmanageable. But I was sitting on step two because I'd come into recovery with a God of my understanding, right? Like I didn't struggle with that. And I heard this woman speaking on step two, and I can't tell you anything that she said except for one sentence. She said, the power in step two doesn't come from the belief. The power in step two comes from the surrender. And when I heard her say those words, I knew in that moment that was my step two experience. And I was able to finally admit that on my own, all my efforts to outrun, outsmart, outthink, outdance, whatever it was I was trying to do with this disease were futile and were never going to be a success. And it was in that moment that I was brought to my knees and able to let go of my own self-will in this process. Oh my God.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Julian, for your question. You was heard. Next up, we've got Mark W.
Thank you. My name's Mark. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Thank you, Janie, and thank you to all the 1011 service team. Thank you, DC. Thank you, Andy, for your wonderful talk. Step 10 tells me I need to continue to grow my understanding and effectiveness. And there's also a really great line in the Keys to the Kingdom. It says we've got this program, this design for living that allows for limitless expansion. And I'm always seeking ways to do that. How can I add to? I'm seeking more. And Andy, in your share, you mentioned a quote from William Blake, the leaflet, the pamphlet from Emmett Fox, and also the Thomas Merton prayer that you read out. And when you read that, I had that spiritual shiver that comes when I know that there's something more in there. There's something that's touching me. So my question is really, what would you, in terms of literature? I thought I had a book of Thomas Merton stuff, but I don't think I have. I had a quick look on my bookshelf. Got many books that I haven't quite got through yet. But would there be anything in particular around those three people that you'd recommend for reading to add and to seek and to add, continue to grow and add for my limitless expansion, please?
Sure, Mark. Thanks. Yeah, there's so much to suggest, but for me, there's a daily reader for Thomas Merton. That's around the world, around the year with Thomas Merton. That's really good. Plus his, really his memoir, his autobiography, which really put him into the world's consciousness, was a 7-Story Mountain. In that, I think between those two will certainly help. And while I have you, I've started to reread this. So this is by Anthony DeMello, The Way to Love. And it's short little tidbits of just incredible wisdom, somewhat before he passed, I believe, too. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mark. You was heard. And we're going to go to our last question, which is going to be from Ollie.
Thanks, Janie. Yeah, I'm Ollie. I'm a recovered drug addict. My first question is to DC. When discussing your 10th step stuff, what does that look like? You know, do you discuss it just with your spiritual guide, your sponsor, or do you discuss it with, you know, the people that you work with people outside the fellowship, etc. And do you make use of, like, you know, voice notes and other technology? And Andy, the book says, if circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. Have you done that? Have you had experience around that? And what, if so, what did that look like? Cheers.
Thanks, Ollie. I'm pretty, this is part of my effort, right, to keep the perfectionism at bay, is I'm pretty open and honest with anybody and everybody that comes in my path. As far as like 10-step stuff, I do have a spiritual advisor, right? And I have some other trusted members in the fellowship that I bring those heavy, deep-seated fears to. But I am also very open and transparent with the other addicts that I walk with, my sponsees, as we call them, right? Because the one thing that I have to remember, and by saying it to other people, it reminds myself, is that no matter how hard I try, I will never outgrow my humanness. And so by standing in my humanness and by being willing to confess, like some of the times that I'm dealing with, you know, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, it gives other people permission in a safe environment to embrace those things and to work through those things and to seek God's guidance and direction when those things come up for them. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, DC. Yeah, Ollie, good to see you. Appreciate your questions. Yeah, you know, for me, straight up, you know, full honesty, it's not happened between my wife and I. Susan, we've been married over 40 years. So there's not been a moment that it's gone forward than just a suggestion, but it's been not met with any, it's not been taken on, which sure, it's been disappointing, but you know what? I come to recognize her journey's her journey. My daughter and son's been different. They are much more open. We've prayed together. We've meditated together. My daughter more so than my son, but still my son too. So it is it's back to being a suggestion, you know, or potentially if folks are attracted to it. And if they're not attracted to it, we know we can't push, you know, it doesn't, you know, can't speak from a spiritual hilltop. You know, I did try that, and, you know, and our books, you know, Big Book talks very clearly about that. So, yeah, you know, I wish it was different. It's just my wish, though, has not been answered that way. That's God's job. So.
Thank you, DC and Andy. Wow, amazing for your answers and for your service this evening. Please, in the reactions, could we show some gratitude for our two speakers tonight? That is the end of share time. However, it is not the end of the meeting. We have a final